Hello everyone, and welcome to today's presentation, Stormwater Innovations, Beyond Business as Usual. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of our panelists today and launch into a few housekeeping items before we get started here. All attendees have been muted to minimize background noise. Audio is available for this presentation through your computer's mic and speakers or by telephone. And your call-in number and access code are in the control panel box on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have a question during the presentation, please type it into the questions box in the upper right-hand side of your screen. Alternatively, you can also click the raise hand icon shown on this slide, and we can unmute you so you can ask your question over the phone. If you do want to ask your question out loud, please choose the phone call option in the audio box of your control panel and enter the phone number, access code, and audio PIN. This will allow me to unmute you so we can hear your question. Today's webinar will contain 3 presentations, followed by designated times to answer 1 to 2 written questions from participants if time allows. During the final Q&A session, you can ask questions targeted to specific presenters or general questions for all presenters. Please note today's webinar is going to be recorded. And if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please type those into the chat box and we will do our best to troubleshoot the issues. Lastly, we ask that you take a minute immediately following today's presentation to fill out the post-webinar survey. If you don't mind doing this, that would be helpful because your feedback is really important to us. And now I'd like to hand things over to Karen Simpson from EPA SNEP program to get the presentation started. Welcome, Karen.
Great, thank you, Amanda. So I just want to take a minute to talk a little bit about the SNEP program, since this is the program that's hosting this webinar today. SNEP is the Southeast New England Program for Coastal Watershed Restoration. It's an EPA geographic program that envisions a resilient ecosystem of clean water, healthy, diverse habitats, and sustainable communities in Southeast New England's coastal watersheds. The program encourages an ecosystem-based approach to increase effectiveness of long-term regional restoration efforts, and we are attempting to build resilient ecosystems and connect communities through action, collaboration, and innovation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the program goals we have 5 of them. The first one is we're striving towards watershed resilience to restore water quality and physical processes that support ecosystem function and watershed resilience. We're also striving for sustainable communities to bolster sustainable communities by protecting and enhancing ecosystem services that support local economies in the SNEP region. The third goal is to assess, track, and communicate change in condition and the effectiveness of action. The fourth one is to enable innovative solutions that facilitate new technologies and approaches to improve habitat, aquatic life, and water quality. And then the fifth goal is to build upon existing geographic programs and foster new programs in advanced solutions to regional environmental issues. So now I just want to touch upon some of the SNEP-funded efforts that we have funded to date. The SNEP program provides support to 2 national estuary programs, Buzzards Bay National Estuary Program and the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program, to help them carry out work that's outlined in their comprehensive conservation and management plans. The SNEP program also provides technical assistance to Cape Cod and the islands. We've provided technical assistance to design and construct 2 subsurface gravel wetlands on Cape Cod, and these subsurface gravel wetlands were designed to treat stormwater for nitrogen removal. We also have a subaward program through Restore America's Estuaries, and this year we funded $2.3 million for Restore America's Estuaries to fund projects that focus on water pollution and habitat degradation. And in that pool of projects, many of those projects had elements of planning, implementation, and/or outreach for innovative stormwater management. And you can learn more about what those projects are at the link on the slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So then I just wanted to touch upon this. We are launching the SNEP Technical Assistance Network. So in 2019, we are funding $1.75 million to increase capacity of municipalities, tribes, and organizations. We will be providing one-on-one assistance with strategic planning and financing approaches for stormwater projects. And the announcement of the recipient of that award will be on October 25th. Okay, so then this slide is just a snapshot of those who are interested in the webinar topic today. So this is from the list of people who registered. We found that 29% were interested from the local government and municipality sectors, 20% from state government, 18% from federal government, 15% in nonprofit agencies, 9% in academia, and then 8% in other. And then this is just a list of all of those organizations that registered. So you can see that the local governments and municipalities are well represented, along with the state, federal agencies, nonprofits, and academia, and also some other organizations. And then lastly, this is just a geographic representation of those who registered and where they are located. So to us, that tells us that folks who are interested are located throughout New England, and we even have a couple of others throughout the country in South Carolina and in California. So today we have 3 speakers. We will be hearing from Wayne Chouinard, who is the town engineer for the town of Arlington in Massachusetts, Gretchen Young, who is the assistant city engineer for the city of Dover in New Hampshire, and Bob Spencer, who is the capital projects coordinator at Seattle Public Utilities. So before we move on to the first speaker, we have a quick poll for all of you to fill out, and we're asking the question, what aspects of stormwater management are you most interested in learning more about? This will help us inform future webinars. I understand that maybe you might be interested in more than one, but if you could just pick the top one you are most interested in, that would be great. And if there is one that you can think of that's not on this list, please feel free to put that in the chat box and send us a message. So we'll leave this open for a few seconds to let you guys answer. All right, great. So the results are in, and it looks like most of you on the webinar right now are interested in the design and implementation for climate resilience. And then secondly, quantifying DMT pollutant and flow reduction benefits. So this information is extremely helpful. It shows us that there's some interest in every single topic that was presented. So we will hopefully use this information to develop future webinars. All right, so time to introduce our first speaker. So our first speaker is Wayne Chouinard. Wayne is the town engineer for the town of Arlington, where he provides specialized and technical engineering services for municipal infrastructure improvements and capital programs. Wayne is responsible for administering the town's MS4 program and has initiated many projects to improve the quality of stormwater runoff. The town is currently working to modify a basic infiltration trench design to adapt to different site conditions, as well as investigating floating treatment wetlands and green roofs on local bus shelters. So Wayne, whenever you're ready.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to come here and talk about stormwater. I'm sure everybody here, it's exciting to them as it is exciting to me. Well, first off, we'll go to the next slide, and the question is, why are we here? And what happened, we had a grant project that we were working on, and it was some funding for a project on the Mystic River. And as part of that, we needed to come up with some in-kind pre-treatment to include with this. So we had initially thought that we were going to be using, I was thinking of an oil grit separator, placing it very close to this project site. But if you go to the next slide, you'll see what happened is we thought we were going to put it in right near the street, right in between 2 catch basins. And as we looked into the site a little bit further, we started finding the gas private utilities. We started finding the MWRA water and sewer, and there was just no place to put this pretreatment device that we were hoping to use. So next slide, please. We undertook a decision because in this part of town we have very coarse sand and highly permeable soils. So we were going to put a leach and catch basin in on a couple of the different streets. And I asked a local contractor to take a look at the site and see if he'd be interested in it. And it was very, very interesting. And he came back and he said, Wayne, what are you doing? He says, you're going to be ripping up the granite curbing here. You're going to have to shore up the utility pole. You're going to have to replace the sidewalk, which meant most of the cost was going to go into putting the existing infrastructure back in place. So we started looking at trying to simplify it a little bit and to try not to run into these impacts. So next slide, please. We just decided to go with a small trench, just a simple trench. The biggest part of the infrastructure replacement here would have been to pave it over again. So we started developing locations to put 9 infiltration trenches in. And you can see as we're here, there's lots to consider here. We got the utilities in the street that we had to deal with. But next slide, please. What we talked about with the developer, the contractor, was reducing the footprint to a manageable size. These trenches were no longer than 15 feet. And we had the flexibility in some places to go 2 feet wide, 4 feet wide. We were able to adjust it as needed based on what we ran into for utilities underground. And we're also trying to provide some flexibility to the contractor to make this more of a more economical project. So next slide, please. So what his recommendation was, and we tried to work with him very closely here, is first thing he thought of was he said, I want to have a small crew come in here. He wanted to keep the mobilization to a minimum. So he said if we kept it to a 5-foot depth, we would not have any OSHA requirements for a trench box. And we would just have to keep the trench open while they're doing the work. And what we decided on was to move forward with this. Initially, we were going to go up against the curb line. This wasn't set in stone. We were able to move it out a little bit away from the curb so the curb wouldn't be undermined. We also gave him some opportunities to cordon off some of the streets so that he would have areas for storage and he wouldn't have to be running around doing lots of trucking. So next slide, please. You see here, he just kept this project really small, but with 9 of these, we made a little impact here. So we allowed him to cordon off the site area until the Friday before the weekend, so that he would be able to do all his paving at once. So he'd have 1 truckload in, come and do his paving. If it wasn't for that, he would have to come in every day with a small amount of asphalt, and then he'd just be doing a little bit of paving at the end of every day. Again, it spent more time running around to get the little things done as opposed to, getting some more BMP in the ground. Next slide, please. So here is what we were able to accomplish. We were able to get 11 trenches installed for approximately $2,500 a piece. And you can see that trench that's on the screen now was one of those wider ones. Again, it was shortened up due to a water service there. Next slide, please. And the great thing about this is we were in another grant program working with the EPA to try to improve the water quality in the Mystic River. And while we joined that grant, we were able to team up with the University of New Hampshire Stormwater Center. And as part of the grant, they helped us quantify the trench design and actually determine a phosphorus removal capacity for this particular trench. And they developed up into what you see here. The next slide, please. In addition to that, they created I gave them a little spreadsheet, which I initially used, and they were able to create a mega spreadsheet. So this was a calculation by them to determine the phosphorus removal capacity of the trenches. If you see very carefully, the first row is BMP1. That's just a sample. That's a sample gravel wetland. The BMP2 is actually a trench that we actually installed. And if you'll see down the bottom, fourth row up, we got 0.08 pounds of phosphorus reduction each year for one little trench. So it actually worked out very well, and we were able to multiply it out times 11. Next slide, please. As part of this, the Stormwater Center also was able to put in some data loggers, and we were able to monitor how the trenches were fluctuating. And what we found is that these trenches were almost handling 2 to 3 times what they were designed for. The initial plan here was to try to capture the first flush, and we were shooting for 0.1 inch. And the data collection showed that it was handling 0.2 and 0.3 inches in most of the trenches. Next slide. As you see here, some of our things that we learned when we first went out there was the complications by utilities in the street. That's why we first changed from the oil grit separator into the leaching trenches. But we didn't want to put much of a burden on the butters on these side streets. So we stayed away from driveways, stayed away from intersections. And as you found, some of the places we installed out there, we had to pick backup locations because we hadn't noticed some of the buried utilities. So as we finished this project, we realized we had to do a little bit more legwork, review the as-built tie cards for the utilities, request the gas plans from the utility company. And another important thing was to review the existing outlet from the catch basin. Next slide, please. And here you see on the left, we were staying away from the intersection corner. These small trenches allowed the contractor to do the work on both sides of the street, yet still allow traffic to get by. And we were able to avoid driveways. And in this case here, the roots were not going into the street, so that was a plus for us. Next slide. Here some of the utility conflicts I was talking about. The gas main on the left side, on the left picture, was too close. That happened to be a cast iron main, so we could not undermine it, otherwise we'd have to do a replacement. Previous trench day shows you the flexibility to go wider and shorter, and just on the right side details the utility services and how they can impact the ability to place one of these trenches. Next slide, please. And this is what I meant to talk about earlier. The outlet pipes from these from the existing catch basins were very critical. We found that depending on which side it came in, what elevation it came in, whether it was a cone or a flat top, that it really had an effect on how well we could put in another pipe next to it. So the basis for this design was to keep it simple, put the outlet, the new infiltration trench, 3 inches below the existing, and then we were able to divert all that first flush flow into the infiltration trench. But you see here, without the proper selection, we got tight on the left side and we were not able to get a hooded outlet on it. So we came up with some modifications in different places where we put a T on one and another one, put a bend on it. But with discussion with our sewer crew, they recommended that we have to core holes in these just so they can get a jet hose in that in case we ever need to clean them out. So we talked to the people that are actually going to be maintaining these, and we have some improvements that we'll do on our next project. Next slide, please. So thankfully, being a cash-strapped bootstrap the municipality. We just received another grant to do some work. So what we're doing is we're going to be implementing some rain gardens, but also we're going to try to spread out the infiltration trenches, and we're actually going to try to modify them slightly using the basic infiltration design, but modify them to try to get them into a grass strip, so it's out of the pavement. And another possibility we're looking at is trying to work it into like a tree trench and get some trees located on the ends of the trenches so we can get some added benefit, carbon footprint removal from the trees, and just try to use the tool and get it to fit more sites. Next slide. That went fast. Any questions?
Okay, we do have one. What does maintenance look like and who does it?
Well, the good thing here is we didn't create anything new. We're still using the infrastructure, which is a catch basin. So the maintenance is still catch basin cleaning, and we at the DPW will perform that cleaning. If we will have any problems in the future, we'll be inspecting these a couple times a year, checking them after storms, making sure that they're functioning. If they need to be cleaned out for any reason, which they shouldn't, if the catch basins are being cleaned, then we can clean them out just like a sewer line. We can get a jet line in through the catch basin, or on some of them we put clean outs on the far end as well.
We do have another question. How did maintenance staff receive these design approaches?
They did not. We implemented the designs, and then we brought them out there during construction. The construction was performed by a subcontractor, and as they were being built, we brought the sewer crews out there, initiated them to the work that was being done, and showed them the way that the outlets were being configured. And that's when we talked to them about how better to put those hooded outlets in for future cleaning.
Wonderful. Thanks, Wayne. For those of you who asked questions that we didn't get to, we will address them at the end as time allows.
Okay, so our next speaker is Gretchen Young. Gretchen is the Assistant City Engineer for the City of Dover in New Hampshire. She manages compliance with NPDES Phase 2 MS4 federal stormwater discharge permits, including preparing the City of Dover Notice of Intent, Stormwater Management Plan, Illicit Discharge Detection and Elimination Plan, and Annual Report. She's also the chair of the Seacoast Stormwater Coalition, which is a group of municipal members throughout the Seacoast region recognized for facilitating an effective and collaborative approach to MS4 compliance. Take it away, Gretchen.
All right, great. Thank you so much for having me speak. So today I'm going to talk about the City of Dover's approach to stormwater management, and it really is a boots-on-the-ground approach. The City of Dover is about 30,000 people. We are 29 square miles located in the southeast of New Hampshire. Two of our receiving waters are tidal. They're tidal rivers. The rest of it is all freshwater streams and rivers. And just to give you an idea, our budget last year was about $145 million. We are tax cap, which means that we can't raise the taxes in the municipality. And of that $145 million, we only had $75,000 set aside for actual stormwater improvements. All right, next slide. So what it takes, I'd say multi-beneficial, practical, and opportunistic. And those three components coming together really is what makes us have a successful stormwater management program. And I'll talk about what those kind of mean for us. Next slide. So multi-beneficial, this is just a slide showing, we have a lot of data and a lot of information about receiving waters. This shows that we have 130 acres of connected pervious area going into one of our little brooks here in the city. We've got all sorts of data that's showing that there's dissolved oxygen issues, high nitrogen, things like that. But this kind of data and this information is hard to get our crews and our guys really, geared up to get out there and do something about it. And it's hard to really get our municipal leaders and our policymakers really excited about just the data. So next slide. So then here is some of the news articles, and these are all actually pretty recent news articles here in Dover. You can see we've got some flooding in one of our streets in the Broadway area. We've got cyanobacteria advisories at William Pond, and everyone's all upset they can't let their dogs go swimming there. And then the last one, you can see there's floodwaters closing the indoor pool. You've got emergency personnel out in the middle of the night, and that's just all of those things are obviously big drags on the city resources. So that's just kind of some of the headlines that we've got. Next slide. And then opportunistic. This is just a spreadsheet. It was part of our MS4 compliance, and this is really looking at high priority for looking for illicit discharges. But we also have kind of similar desktop exercises where you look at the receiving waters that have the highest pollution, and those would strategically be where you would want to implement your stormwater practices. However, we've got a lot of resources, and I can tell you our highway guys who are putting in a lot of the stormwater stuff aren't really thumbing through these long spreadsheets. They're just kind of doing it where they see a need for it and what they see out in the field. So next slide. Again, with opportunistic, this is another two recent articles. Dover potholes dispute leads to arrest. So that's just to say that people are really passionate about their potholes here in New England and in New Hampshire, and we've got a lot of them. So people want to see their roads in good condition. And then also aging water infrastructure hinders Dover, New Hampshire. We have a lot of really old infrastructure that we need to use our financial resources to maintain. So we've got a lot of competing needs for the same tax cap and the same funding. Next slide. So opportunistic, here's a recent project it's just started construction last month. It's about a $4 million project. The impetus behind it is upgrading the 150-year-old cast iron water line, which had a number of breaks throughout the neighborhood, and then also just really, really poor roadway conditions. It was having a lot of trouble plowing in the wintertime. Residents were constantly complaining. So those two needs are what got this project, this neighborhood upgrade, to get into the capital improvement plan. But while we were under design, we were able to sneak in 10 low-impact development BMPs throughout the project for a very minimal additional cost. So we sort of piggybacking on what was already in the CIP and kind of sneaking things in where we have the opportunity to do that. Now, I don't know if this watershed would be ranked in high or low, but I can tell you we got a lot of bang for our buck, so to speak, by being able to take advantage of having the crews already out there and having the roadway already under construction. So next slide. And then practical. So here is a rain garden that was designed about 4 or 5 years ago. It's at the entrance to the city, and you can see they had all these very specific plants that they wanted, and but you can see in the lower picture, it's really not being maintained. There's just kind of overgrowth. We don't really know what's in there. There may be invasive species. It's just not being maintained the way that it had been envisioned. But what you can see is that maintenance is happening out there. So somebody's mowing the lawn and somebody's weed whacking. You can sort of see some benches through there. Somebody's doing that. Somebody's trimming trees. So maintenance is happening. It's just not happening in the rain garden the way that it was designed. All right, next slide. So practical. We start looking at what we're good at. So what we in the city of Dover are very good at is street sweeping. We do it, multiple times a week throughout the summer season in the downtown areas. We even got sidewalk sweepers. We're very good at mowing. Our guys are great at doing that, and we're good at sucking out catch basins. So those things, we started looking at the BMPs that would highlight the strengths and sort of showcase the work that our guys do rather than trying to create some new practice or some new policies. All right, next slide. So here I'm just going to give you some examples of the things that we've been doing throughout the city, but this is what we called a rethought rain garden. And it went in 2003, and I think originally there had been discussion about doing plantings, and there had been some other rain gardens that had gone in that had plantings. Again, there were maintenance issues, and our superintendent of public works at the time, he's now our deputy director, said no, he didn't want another garden. He wasn't going to deal with it. He said plant grass. And the UNH Stormwater Center, who Wayne was talking about earlier, was involved, and they said, you know what, why not? So they planted the grass in that rain garden, and again, it went in 2003, and that lower picture is a picture I took just the other day. It's next to a field. When the crew goes out and mows the field, they just head on down there, mow the rain garden. That pulls up the nitrogen or the nutrient uptake, and it's functioning perfectly, and no one's really giving it too much thought. Next slide. So here's another one. In 2015, there was some discussion about doing porous pavement. Again, Bill Belanger, who was the superintendent at the time, said absolutely not. We don't have the vacuum capability of sucking up the sediment. We don't want to go to a salt-only application because we've got salt sand mix throughout the city. It just was not going to be a good fit. So working with the Stormwater Center, they were able to say, all right, well, they flipped the porous pavement basically upside down. So similar to what Wayne was talking about with the infiltration trends, it's pretty similar to that. You have your catch basins with your sumps, and then there's the hoods, and then it goes into a pipe, which goes into a large reservoir, and then you've got your filter course at the bottom rather than at the top like a traditional porous pavement section. And this way, here you can go to the next slide. So that, you can see it under construction, the large stone area that is over top the filter course. And then the bottom picture shows the finished product, and it's just a big paved area. You would have no idea that there was a great BMP right in that parking lot. And the maintenance for this is sucking the sediment out of the catch basins, and obviously we have to occasionally take a look and make sure there's drawdown still happening, but and then some street sweeping in that area. But for the most part, really, really easy maintenance, and again, no one really thinks much about it. All right, next slide. Some other stuff that we have to deal with is work in the roadway. Really have some limited potential for what we can and can't do. This was a project that came to our attention because the residents were experiencing ponding in the existing road. It was getting muddy. They were having some flooding in the neighborhood. The catch basins really weren't put where they needed to be. So initially, the idea was to just put new catch basins in and have it pipe directly out to the stream. But since we were already going to be doing all that construction and putting in those catch basins in the strategic low points and fixing up the road, we decided to again put in basically one of those upside down porous pavement sections. So there's 4 catch basins, there are perforated pipes connecting them, a large reservoir area. It can percolate what it can. The soils in the area aren't all that great, but it can sort of percolate in what the soils will take, and then the overflow into where we originally were just going to directly discharge. All right, next slide. So there it is under construction. This was great. We had our guys out there. We actually were able to fix some sewer services while we were doing the work in the area. We were able to use materials that we had stockpiled in our yard. We were really piecing everything together, but we were able to do it, and able to do it relatively inexpensively. Next slide. And then again, that's what it looks like. It just looks like a paved street. I mean, you really wouldn't know that innovative BMP is going on out there. We maintain it by cleaning out the catch basins on a biannual basis, and then that's what the outfall looks like. And you can see it's holding up really well. All right, next slide. And then here's one of our favorite little jewels in the city. It's called a filtering catch basin. And it's basically just a big tank. The real, I guess, innovation here is that it's got that pre-treatment area right in the unit. So you've got your sump that's getting all of the sediment out, and there's actually a screen that's keeping things from floatables from getting over. Now these aren't, groundbreaking ideas. This is the stuff we've been talking about forever, but they work. So in order to get this filter media, which, I guess like a traditional tree box filter or something like that, again, Bill Belanger said, we're not doing any of that filter media unless we can catch the sediment upstream of it. So we came up with this. So it goes into the first little treatment box, and then it overflows, filters through the media, where it can either infiltrate into the ground, or you can have a pipe that takes it back out. Next slide. There it is being installed. We've designed it so that it comes in 3 sections, or actually you can make it as long as you want, but multiple sections, and that way you can use the smaller equipment to install it, similar to the way you would do a catch basin or drainage manhole. The first time we did it, we ordered a large structure, and we didn't have the equipment in-house to be able to move it, so that was a lesson learned for sure. That's why we do it these 3 sections, and then you can just bolt them together in the field. You can see that, the hole is pretty substantial, but not any larger than really much larger than putting in a catch basin. So it doesn't really change the cost super dramatically by putting in this filtering feature. All right, next slide. And then again, here's what it looks like. You just have a drain manhole over the filter area. You've got your catch basin over the little section with the sump. Close it up. You would never know it was there. You clean it by sucking out the catch basin, and then you can pull that manhole aside. Just take a simple little rake or something, rake it a little bit, use the same suction that you use, the vac truck that you use for your catch basins, and just kind of suck up the top layer, and you're good to go. And then obviously multiple years, that filtering material may need to be replaced, but it's not an ongoing maintenance issue. All right, next slide. Here's one of the first real BMP stormwater low impact development projects that the city took on. You can see it has, we have a large impervious area. It was mostly the Hannafords, which is a shopping center, that was discharging straight into some property that the city owned. There are no plans to do any improvements in that shopping center, so there wasn't really any opportunity for the city to mandate that the private property owner do any improvements. So we decided we would try and implement something that would handle both the private and the public contributing area. All right, next slide. So here is the gravel wetland, and you can see there's a kind of a hump that goes down the middle of the wetland, kind of as the flow goes, which is not something I think we normally see. But this was an example of the first time that the engineers that were doing the design really listened and worked with the public works staff and the superintendent. That is an existing water line that goes down through there. It's a pretty large water line. It was in good condition, and the plans initially called for moving it, and actually moving it to an area where there was ledge, so there was going to be blasting and all this stuff. And our public works superintendent said he wasn't moving his water line, that there was no need for it, just to put in a gravel wetland. So, after a little push back and forth between the two, they were able to find a compromise and just kind of leave a hump down the middle of the gravel wetland, and it functions really well. All right, next picture, or next slide. So There you can see there's a picture of Bill Belanger, the superintendent that had done a lot of this. Looking out over his gravel wetland, after 3 years of growth, it does have a lot of growth. We're able to just send our crews out there once every 3 years with basically a machete. They get to hack it all down and pull it all out. And they don't really mind doing that. So they don't love doing mulch and gardening and pruning and things like that, but they'll go out and just hack down the vegetation once every few years. All right, next slide. So here we go. This is just BMPs as standard practice. So now we finally, after many years, kind of are of the mindset that whenever we're doing something, let's see if a BMP could be the solution. So rather than just looking for areas to put stormwater BMPs in, we wait for the problems to come to us and then see if we can fix them using BMPs. So here's one. There was a resident that was complaining that runoff was going down her driveway. These complaints had gone on for years. There had been sandbags that were put up to try and keep the rain from going down. Eventually we decided, all right, we're going to put a catch basin in upstream of her driveway, and we did do that, and then we went and put an infiltration trench just where we would have put the new pipe anyway, so really minimal added cost, and we got some great infiltration out of there and pollutant removal and all of that. And then another one, we had some broken structures. You don't have to go back, but a broken structure. We had good porous soils, so we replaced it with an infiltration basin rather than a traditional basin, and we just get some good infiltration. And then here's some successes. So we were talking about that filter and catch basin. Well, we've got some data through the UNH Stormwater Center that shows that it really is working. I mean, it really is treating and filtering the bulk of the runoff that is coming to that basin. And we aren't sizing the basins for any specific contributing area. We're just kind of using rule of thumb and what's coming to it. And we're finding that it really is able to handle pretty high loads high rainfall events coming through the basin. Next. And then here's another just success. This is the Grove Street one that we did. It was the work in the roadway where we had the infiltration. And you can see the cumulative runoff reduction was 83%. So, you know, that's what the neighborhood was complaining about, is this high level of runoff. There were flooding, there were issues like that. And this has really drastically reduced the amount of runoff that was leaving that area, and so it's really worked well for us. Next. Here is another level of success. This is just a gauge that was put in one of our, it's called the Berry Brook, where a lot of the area had been, a lot of BMPs have been implemented, and it showed originally, before anything was done, that brook was really peaky. It would have some flash floods. It would cause erosion. It would cause issues that we would have to be dealing with from the city's point. And after all of the BMPs went in, that peak factor was, greatly reduced. We're not having those issues anymore. So that's a real success. All right, next slide. And then here's a great success. We have our guys building a rain garden. This is going to be one of those grassed-in rain gardens, or it actually is, and they're happy as can be about doing it. So our crews, our highway and utility crews, are really buying into the green infrastructure and the low-impact development strategies because we're doing them in a way that they can be successful at implementing them and at maintaining them. And so, they can feel good about themselves rather than they feel like they have to do something different or aren't doing it right. So that's a huge success for us. And then next slide. And then the next big success, we finally get a positive newspaper article about the Dover. That's Clark Friesen from New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, and then Alexander Dunn, who's the EPA regional administrator, and they came to visit Dover, and they were impressed by the work that we're doing. And it's Bill, and he's smiling, he's happy. So that's obviously a great success for us too. All right, next slide. All right, I have to quickly say thank yous to the UNH Stormwater Center, and I encourage anyone, if you're interested in more of the technical data behind these stormwater BMPs that I've been talking about, or any of the presentations, there's a lot of really great information on the UNH Stormwater Center webpage, and a lot of the Dover specific stuff is called the Berry Brook Project. And then also NHDES, who funded a number of our original BMP installs, and they were really, really flexible with us and allowed Dover to think through how the maintenance was going to play into it. And, you know, there were a number of redesigns, but they stuck with us, and they stuck with us and funded it. And so thank you to them. And, all right, next slide. And any questions?
In the essence of time, we are going to skip questions for now, but we'll address questions for you, Gretchen, at the end of this presentation. So we just want to make sure that Bob has time to present as well.
Okay, so our next speaker is Bob Spencer. Bob is a capital projects coordinator at Seattle Public Utilities. In the last 10 years, he's been working on green infrastructure pilots, programs, and projects, including maintaining natural drainage systems, developing the RainWise program, and citing natural drainage system partnerships with Seattle Department of Transportation and community partners. He is currently working on bioretention projects in the Thornton Creek watershed and expanding workforce capacity and training for RainWise and other green infrastructure projects. Bob has also worked extensively in salmon restoration projects that involve public-private stewardship and green stormwater practices in King County and the city of Seattle.
Well, thanks. This is the overview of our RainWise program, and in the interest of time, I'm going to move pretty quickly, and we'll probably generate some questions for you. Next slide, please. So RainWise is our private property rebate program that allows our customers to be part of the solution for excess stormwater flows, particularly those that affect combined sewer overflows. Next. We do that by rebating two kinds of facilities, either cisterns or rain gardens, or a combination of the two. And our policy context for this is not only are we under a consent decree with the federal government to control our overflows, but we also have a council directive to manage 700 million gallons of runoff annually using green stormwater facilities by the year 2025. As you can see, our utility incentives, our rebate program, RainWise, is one part of that. The rest are those required by our stormwater code, community and private installations, as well as our public works projects in the right of way, as well as those that we're pursuing in partnership with private property owners. Next, please. When we did our costing for this, we pay $4 per square foot of impervious roof area directed to a rain garden, and a percentage of that to a cistern based on the size of the roof and the size of the receiving cistern. We looked at our traditional detention facilities in this particular slide. We looked at our bioretention projects in the right of way, and you can see it compares pretty favorably, especially when you start looking at the fact that the operations and maintenance of these facilities on private property is taken care of by the homeowner under a maintenance agreement. In the case of a residential sized parcel controlling less than 2,000 square feet of roof area, we're basically talking a 5-year agreement, and for larger parcels, it's a 10-year agreement. Next slide. This is the lay of the land, so to speak. We've got 18 CSO basins, including those under jurisdiction of King County, who has certain basins within city limits that they're addressing through partnership with this program. We have roughly 58,000 eligible properties. Next. So our timeline, we didn't start this all at once. This is an iterative program. Even before 2010, when we launched our pilot, we two smaller pilots in very small sub-basins that taught us some of the things that we didn't want to do. One of those things was we didn't want to construct these using city crews or contracted crews. We found that the heterogeneity of the parcels made it really difficult and not particularly cost effective to go in. So we decided to go with an independent contractor. So we launched a small pilot in 2010 in one of Basin 151, 152 in Ballard, which had not only a pretty good selection of parcels that looked like they would be suitable, but they were also having some fairly large overflow problems. And that was a 5,000 parcel basin. We were pretty successful that first year. We started late. We started second quarter. We got about 25 installations, but everything worked out well enough and enabled us to, in 2011, next, we added another basin just to the south of it, probably about 2,500 parcels. That went well, so we got permission to keep rolling. Next. In 2012, we added another 4 CSO basins that were within our jurisdiction and more than doubled the size of the program. Next. 2013, under a memorandum of agreement with King County, we added their CSO basins within the city and again doubled the size of the program. And the way we did that, while we have each jurisdiction does their own inspection and cuts their own checks, we share outreach, scheduling of inspectors, and generally it's the same as if, when you go to McDonald's anywhere in the country or a Subway or whatever, the only thing that a citizen sees that's different between the two programs is the logo on the side of the inspection car and the signature of the treasurer when they get their rebate check. Next. At that same year, we added another 7 basins, and we got pretty much to where we are right now in terms of total numbers. Next. And King County added another 2 very large basins in 2015, 2016. All through this time, we were not perfect. This was pretty much a car with a steering wheel, no brakes, and we started changing the tires as it went down the hill. Just when we thought we knew everything that we were going to run into, we would keep running into different things all the time. So adaptive management has been the watchword for how we've done this program. Next. Since then, we've had some other changes. None have added additional basins just yet, but we're on our 3rd project manager. Next. And last year, we did some major staffing changes. Where a lot of our work early in the program was driven by consultant contracts. We brought quite a bit of it in-house, and we've been doing work on trying to build our contractor capacity. I'll say a little bit more about that. Next. So how does this all work together? We have an independent contractor base, and we hold trainings twice a year. We require that people come to us already knowing how to plant plants and glue pipes and read blueprints. So we've solicited from existing independent landscape contractors, side sewer contractors, general contractors, landscape designers, folks who are basically in affiliated fields and have the necessary skills. We take them through about 8 hours of training that teaches them why we're doing this, how to work with the city and what our design standards are. And then we give them a hands-on tour to look at different installations. So we've trained about 800 individuals, and at any given time, we have about 50 contractors, of which 20% of them do the majority of our work. Meanwhile, we're doing a variety of outreach activities, a lot of the standard things, postcards, events, tables. We have a pretty large website. We try to take advantage of both earned and unearned media. we attend fairs, and one thing that's been really successful lately is we contract with community-based organizations to have what I call Tupperware parties, but they're basically come and see an installation at this person's house or come to the local library, and we have people who had installations talk about their experience and let people ask questions. And most recently, we've been having webinars, which have been pretty well attended because people don't have to show up anywhere. Once we drive our customers to the website that enables them to select the contractor of their choice, once they have a plan and a contract in place, the contractor calls in a pre-inspection. We look at where they're going, whether their setback distances are right, whether there's an opportunity for them to collect more roof area. And our inspectors tend to be cooperative and educational as opposed to punitive and checkboxy, in that they help the contractors not only cite things, but to get more roof area, which means there's more money for the rebate, and it means we're getting more control of the impervious surface. After they pass the pre-inspection, we say, go ahead and construct it. They call in a post when they're finished. If they meet all our standards, they then submit about a 10-page rebate package to us, which we generally get out the door in 4 to 6 weeks. But we do maintain that we can take up to 8. Once that rebate is issued, we have them sign our homeowner agreement, which is 5 to 10 years, and they say that they'll keep it there, that they will maintain it, and that if they sell their property, they will notify us. We tried to stay away from documenting or recording an easement on the deed because of the cost and the deterrence. We find that it was a little too scary if we did that, besides a notarized signature and the filing fee, that it just seemed like a little bit too much of a commitment. So we reach out to them on a regular basis through emails and reminders. We have videos on our website to try and get people to maintain their facilities, and we do follow-up inspections within that 5-year period, staff permitting, to see whether there's presence or absence. Needless to say, with the amount of growth that the city of Seattle's been having, we've lost a couple under new condo developments. Next. So life to date, what have we done? We have, between King County and SPU, over 1,800 installations. We're controlling 52 acres of impervious surface to rain gardens and cisterns, and have an estimated 26 million gallons of stormwater controlled annually, of which 400,000 gallons is modeled CSO control volume. Next. This is the future as we move forward. If you look at the orange and yellow, those are the existing parcels in the program, and we have permission to move into the green areas that you see. That's our 3 major creek watersheds for a water quality-based program. We've held up on that right now because our contractors tend to be money motivated. And if I open up those low-hanging fruits areas, our CSO areas will suffer. So we've been working on trying to get more contractor involvement in the program before we open those areas. Next. So contractor capacity is our limit on expansion right now. In the last year or so, we tried to offer different enhancement opportunities to our contractors, because with the good economy, we lost some of our better contractors to traditional landscaping and contracting work, where you didn't have to fill out a 10-page rebate package or go through an inspection process or wait for a rebate. You could just do a project and say $10,000 and get your work. So we thought we'd help those who had trouble with marketing or customer service or other business related items by giving them enrichment workshops and availing them of local small business assistance. That really didn't work. So what I'm working on right now is an MOA with our local community college to develop an 11-week boot camp. We're hoping to have 20 people enroll, of which 50% will be traditionally underserved communities and people of color who will be scholarshiped. And then we'll open it up for regular tuition for potential people who want to start a business, but it's essentially an incubator where we start out and we teach them everything they know to get their City of Seattle business license, to get their contractor's license, to get their bonding requirements, how to create a portfolio of work, customer service, estimating, all those things. And at the end, they'll be the people who we allow into the creek basins, and we'll do that on a hand-holding basis for their first 3 projects. And so hopefully I'll have something interesting to talk about in regard to that next year. Next. Another thing that we've run into that you need to be aware of, the federal government considers a rebate as unearned income, and it's considered federally taxable income to the recipient. I like to compare this to winning a sailboat or a car on The Price is Right. You can't actually get that sailboat or car until you pay the government for it. They won't release it. So that W-4 from our customer can be intimidating to some folks. And we've been working on that for a little while, but still haven't been able to gain a lot of traction on that. Next. As we move forward, we're looking at a couple different changes. In particular, there's about 20,000 properties in the city that are large roofs that also have large parking lot facilities. And we've done about 40 of them so far. They're mostly faith-based organizations. It's some multifamily and the occasional commercial building. But what we found, once you get over 2,000 square feet, you trigger stormwater code. And that is has a bunch of other requirements like pre-settling basins and pit tests that can put a lot of upfront sunk costs into a project, could turn out to be infeasible. So our contractors are hedging their bets and installing cisterns when we'd rather see rain gardens. So we're going to reconfigure that portion of the program to be more of a competitive grant application that rewards aggregation of properties and provides extra incentives to cover that risk. We're also looking at adding parking lot surfaces and underground infiltration galleries, so we can get more of that impervious surface. And we're potentially looking at offering a bonus for a certain number of new installations per year by any given individual contractor in hopes of spurring more rain-wise work. Next. So my contact information's up top here. The next website is the Rainwise website, which is part of our 700 million gallons website. If you go in there, you can experience the customer interface with the program. And if you're interested in the nitty-gritty that our contractors see, our design details, our rebate documents, how a project moves through the system, go to the lower link. You can go to the very bottom and click it, or you can just use this URL and get there. Any questions?
Yeah, we do have one question, Bob, that came in for you. Have you seen any rain-wise BMPs gone bad where hydrology changes impacted a gutter? If so, how was it resolved?
Thankfully, we haven't had any hydrology changes. We do require an infiltration test before installing a rain garden, and that usually gives us a no-go or go message, and it's a pretty straightforward, simple pit test, hand dug. We have had 1 or 2 instances where an overly fine compost was used as a mulch during wet season installation, and the compost mulch actually clogged up. And we do require our contractors to warranty their installations for the first 6 months. And we've been able to go in and scrape that off and use an appropriate mulch during an appropriate season and essentially fix those facilities.
Great, thanks for explaining that. We'll get to the other questions at the end, but Karen, I'm going to pass it off to you again.
Sure, great, thank you. And thank you to all of our speakers for not only going over a lot of the challenges that are associated with stormwater management, but also providing some examples for potential solutions. I think some of the challenges that we heard about today, one challenge is what's under the ground, such as utility services, the physical characteristics of the site in terms of the condition and design of existing infrastructure. Competing funding needs and resources available is another challenge. Property ownership, and then another challenge that came up in Bob's talk was contractor capacity of those hired to implement innovative solutions. Our speakers did a really good job outlining some creative and innovative ways to address some of these challenges and provided examples of how to address many types of constraints in a different way than would typically be used. Wayne had mentioned that using a simple approach in a small space can help to avoid spending a lot of money and still provide environmental benefits. And then Gretchen talked a little bit about if we could be strategic about identifying what's practical and identify where the opportunities are, then we're more likely to implement a stormwater management program that yields multiple benefits. And she also offered another simple approach of just planting grass for a rain garden, which would allow for easy maintenance. And then Bob talked about engaging private property owners through his RainWise program, which incentivizes the property owners to be a part of the solution, and then to also have them talk about their experience with others who might be interested. He mentioned that using adaptive management is important as we learn more about the challenges and solutions associated with managing stormwater, and then to address the issue of contractor capacity by developing a training program for contractors. So I think now we're turning it over to the group to ask some questions.
Great, we have lots of questions that have come in. So for those of you who still want to ask questions, please type those into the chat box. And if you can specify who your question is for, that's helpful, or let us know if you're asking all speakers. So let us know whether it's for Wayne, Gretchen, or Bob. Gretchen, I'm going to start with you. Do you think Dover, New Hampshire would be a good candidate for passing a stormwater utility to fund further VMPs and to meet their MS4 permit requirements?
So that is an ongoing question and an ongoing debate, and Dover, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I might be a little bit off on the timing, did attempt to pass a stormwater utility, and it got through committee, and eventually it got to the city council, and there was just a lot of residential pushback to a rain tax, and I think we've all heard these issues. So ultimately, it didn't pass. I think our staff understand that it's probably the only way you could fund a successful program, but I think I'm not sure we're quite there to do it just yet.
Okay. A question for Wayne. Someone's saying, you mentioned the soil condition in Arlington. Were you using this as a small scale in your site decisions, or is it just generally functional lot infiltration?
On half of our town, the permeability is actually quite rapid, so it can be used on any scale. Typically, though, we designed each trench just for a micro sub area from catch basin to catch basin.
Great, thank you. Bob, we have a question for you. Someone is wondering, what is the funding source for RainWise?
We're rate-based, and we do have a stormwater fee, and it's for funds allocated to drainage and wastewater activities.
In my town, our problem is not, I think this is for Gretchen, but they didn't specify. In my town, our problem is not that the rain gardens are not maintained. It is that the town keeps coming in and mowing the rain gardens. How do you keep that from happening? Or do you just let the grass do its thing in the basin?
So we just let the grass do its thing in the basin, and that's kind of the issue, is that that just makes your staff look foolish when they're mowing what should be a garden, and it just looks silly. So we've taken the approach of what is successful is the grass, and so we go that way. And when our guy's out there mowing, he's mowing what he's supposed to be mowing, and so it's a success rather than an embarrassment or a failure.
Okay, thanks for explaining that. Pertaining to the successes that rely on water flowing into the new BMP, Gretchen, I think this is for you too. Pertaining to the successes that rely on water flowing into the new BMP, I've witnessed issues in water pathways, either from patching of asphalt or humping due to frost. Have you seen these issues presented in your area as well?
Yes, yep. So patching and frost heaves and stuff, sometimes it does require, after an installation, you have to go back and kind of maybe grind out some of the pavement to make sure it's going the right way. But that's true with anything. That's the kind of maintenance we're constantly going after, frost heaves and things like that. We obviously try to avoid that and try and construct it so that we don't have to revise it, but that does sometimes happen.
Thank you. Bob, this question is for you. What is the rate structure and rebate amount?
The rebate amount is $4 per square feet. I can't personally speak if you're talking to our stormwater fee. You could find that on our website. Did that answer the question?
If that didn't answer the question, then if Megan, if you could write in another question, that would be helpful. Wayne, this question is for you. Do you use any media or just stone?
We just use stone. The sand in this area is actually phenomenally. It's almost from the beach. But no, we just use the stone. We even top it with stone as well. And there's no media below it.
Great. We have a question for all panelists. Can the panelists talk about the opportunistic versus optimization approach? Specifically, how does municipal buy-in affect overall ability to implement solutions? So how about we start with you, Wayne, and then we'll go to Gretchen and then Bob.
I would have to say the municipal buy-in, we're getting there. As a town, we are now working together as a team. I felt like 8 years ago when I first got here, I was kind of trying to lead the charge, but we've developed a little team here with Bill, the assistant town engineer, and Emily, our environmental planner. And we're branching out in different directions, talking in lots of different places and getting the ideas and their needs out there. So we're getting there. It's just slow.
Great, thanks. Gretchen, what about you?
Okay, so we talk a lot about opportunistic versus, I guess, strategic or whatever, and I feel very strongly that opportunistic is strategic because we just get so much more bang for our buck by taking opportunities, and we get a lot more community buy-in when we're solving perceived problems and multiple problems that the residents really see. Obviously, and we know that there are pollution issues, but by being able to take opportunities of when you're going to be out there anyway doing work and take advantage of that and implementing BMPs feels like the most successful path for us.
Thanks. And Bob?
I would say this is strategic here. It's part of our CSO response. Although it is opportunistic in that, some of the control, Rainwise isn't doing the heavy lifting. That's being done by traditional detention facilities and our other public works projects. But it does enable us to take advantage of educating the people we serve, involving them as partners and being part of the solution. And it provides us with a certain amount of system resilience in the face of climate change, which I think is also important. In the early years, we've been in green stormwater and have been implementing that since around 2000. And in the early years, the program was not as supported. So it was really important to have, a vocal advocate. And now I feel like we're very supported, and we're actually in process of expanding our use of green infrastructure. And that really makes a difference.
Yeah, thanks to all three of you for answering that. Wayne, we have a question for you. Aren't you worried about damage to the trenches from cars driving over them?
Oh, not at all. We go to the maximum 5-foot depth, and we come up, I would say, with the average to 1.5 to 2 feet of stone beneath an SDR, typical SDR 35 pipe, and then there's a foot of stone back on top of it. So it's encapsulated in clean crushed stone. I'm not worried about it at all. It can stand up to any traffic.
Bob, this question is for you. How do you get commercial sector properties on board?
We don't get a lot of commercial sector properties on board. And the reason for that is they usually don't have enough land base to be exploitable to install a facility. Our land values are pretty high, and so a parking space is a lot more important than a rain garden. So we have very few commercial facilities. We have had our consultants and our program managers go out and do a little bit more wooing of the large properties, but in general, commercial facilities don't have the land base to support us.
And a follow-up question to that is, are there thresholds to which parcel sizes that you target, or is it just based on willingness to participate?
In general, our targeting is based on our CSO basins and how well the other facilities we have are performing. So we'll give extra emphasis to those basins where maybe the modeling that we did for siting certain facilities wasn't as up to par as it could have been, and having additional outreach and additional facilities could help make up the difference. And we also do special outreach to faith-based communities.
We have another question for you, Bob. Can your approach be scaled up or down? Is it just as effective for small municipalities as for a place like Seattle?
I don't know why it wouldn't be. We started out small. I can't see why you couldn't start it out in a small municipality.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. That's it for the written question. So if someone wants to ask a question over the phone, at this point you can raise your hand in your control panel and I can unmute you. Or you can also type in your question as well if you have any last-minute questions that you want to ask our speakers today. Okay, we do have another question that came in. This is for all three of you. Do you consider the impacts of climate change, such as sea level rise, when designing BMPs in coastal areas? So how about we start with you, Wayne?
I would have to say no, we do not. We're looking on a micro scale at this point for water quality, and we're using other approaches for flood control. We're actually a very densely developed, urbanized, tiny little town, so there's not a lot of room. There's not a lot of room for really flood storage, so I would say no.
Okay. What about you, Gretchen?
Definitely to some degree. The city of Dover actually has a climate adaptation piece of its master plan, and as a municipal worker, you are always working under the direction of the master plan. So there are pieces of that. Similar to Wayne, though, each specific undertaking is not specifically sized for climate adaptation, but I think as part of the master plan, implementing BMPs is something that the community feels like is part of coastal resiliency and climate change impacts, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And Bob, what about you?
I would say that's a resounding yes out here. We actually have a staff climatologist and have done mapping of areas of the city. And I know recent projects, particularly those along the Duwamish River, are really considering the effects of sea level rise on future projects, both green and gray.
Okay, and one last question before we wrap it up. this is also for all three of you, but I'll just let whoever has something to say, you can chime in. Do you have any examples of successful BMPs for green infrastructure in the world of climate change?
Any green infrastructure is successful when it comes to climate change, but here we just try to increase our toolbox. We've used porous pavement, we've used rain gardens, we're doing infiltration trenches now. We're going to try to blend those off and turn them into green trenches and tree trenches as well. But anything moving forward that allows us to increase the green capacity, I think is great. One thing mentioned in my bio is we're looking into floating wetlands and green roofs for bus stops as well, which is something we can get out there as a pilot project using like an Eagle Scout project in town. So, like I said, anything that you can get out there to make this in the forefront and put it into people's vision, that they can see that it's an issue and they can use these things to address it, is a good thing.
Thanks, Wayne. Gretchen or Bob, do either of you have examples of successful BMPs?
I do one that just comes to my mind right now, and we actually haven't implemented it yet, but you all saw the filtering catch basin. We just recently got a grant with DES Coastal Management to look at, I mean, this doesn't sound like we're reinventing the wheel, but to try and incorporate trees into those, which would have some carbon impacts and some other climate change improvements, and also obviously just beautification in our downtown areas and other good qualities of having trees. So that's one that just jumps to the forefront. And then obviously all of this has benefits for the climate change.
Bob, did you have something to add, or?
I don't know if I have that much more to add, but I know we're revamping that 700 million gallons website right now. And by the end of the year, you should be able to see quite a few examples of BMPs of what I would call successful in the face of climate change.
Great, we're looking forward to that. So now I'm going to hand things over to Karen to do a final wrap-up of today's presentation.
All right, great, and thank you to all who asked questions. And thank you to everyone who tuned in today to learn more about stormwater innovations that are beyond the business as usual approach. As Amanda mentioned at the beginning, this webinar has been recorded and will be posted on the SNEP website. Shortly after this webinar, you will all receive a link to a survey, and the responses to that survey would be really useful to us to not only let us know how we did with this webinar, but also what we can change for next time, if anything. We will also add your email to our mailing list for when we send out information about future webinars. And we'll also send out information about where you can find this recording of the webinar when it's available. So thank you again, and we hope that the information presented in this webinar was not only engaging, but also useful. So we'll go ahead and end this webinar and hope to see you all at future webinars. Thank you.